So today we're going to cover two areas. One is the editorial process and peer review, and the second is issues related to misconduct. So I'm going to start off first by talking about editorial process. So why is it important for us to know what the editorial process is all about? After all, I've written a paper, I've sent it to the journal. The journal is going to review it and then tell me whether or not they're going to publish the paper. So why should I get into the business of trying to understand the editorial process or what the journal does at the back end? The reason you need to understand these processes, or the benefit of understanding these processes, is that you can then make life easy for the editor of a journal as well as for yourself. So if you know a little bit about what's going to happen, you can decide what you wish to do, how you wish to do it, and therefore make things a little easier for everybody else. Remember, the whole process is not an automated process. It's not a machine which does everything. There is, for every step, a human being behind that step which seems to be automated. So there is somebody taking a decision. So remember, as humans, however fair we wish to be, we are humans. And therefore, there could be a day on which, if you send in a paper which is not necessarily in the best of shape, an editor might just turn around and say, I'm not going to look at this rubbish. And what is the rubbish? The rubbish is that the whole article is in two types of fonts. So it raises my suspicion that you've copied stuff from two different places. So just being a little finicky, looking at the nitty-gritty of everything that you need to do and understanding that and doing it will make life easy for you and increase your success rate. So we've talked about the IMRAD format, and we've talked about the other parts of a paper, including title, abstract, keywords, references, and we've also talked about authorships and acknowledgements. So as far as the editorial process is concerned, as I said, the whole process is a process of negotiation between the editors, the authors, and the reviewers. And the persons at the center of the thing that's at the center of all this is a paper, a manuscript that you've written based on the research that you have done. So when you submit a manuscript, you must adhere to the format. So one of the first thing you should do before you submit a paper to a journal is to look at the instructions of the journal to authors. Sorry, I just went to pick up my cup of tea because I forgot that I'd made a cup of tea and forgot to pick it up.
Okay.
Anyway, so sorry. So it's important to adhere to the format that the journal would like you to submit the article in. Remember, at the time of acceptance, none other than a very famous editor of the Lancet, Theodore Fox, said that sometimes I wonder when I sit in front of my table that if I were to exchange the accepted and rejected piles of papers, would anybody come to know? So what was he trying to say? Was he trying to say that the peer review process was useless? No. What he was trying to say is that when you reach the point of accepting a paper, you've gone through a fair amount of scrutiny. The paper has gone through a fair amount of scrutiny, a fair amount of revision at times. And sometimes the difference between the last accepted paper and the first rejected paper on a particular week or in a particular week is very little. So you could actually swap a few papers here and there, and maybe not many people would come to know. And often the reason why a person decides to pick up one or the other paper where the difference is so marginal is that there are things there that are comfortable for them. For example, the language used is something which they're familiar with. The punctuation marks are great. They don't need to go correcting spelling mistakes because there are tons and tons of them. So yes, if the science is great, anybody would accept those spelling mistakes. But if the science is the same as another paper, then a paper with a cleaner copy, a cleaner view, a cleaner look is something that's more likely to go through. The next important thing is a covering letter. In the old days, when you submitted a manuscript by post, by proper mail, and that's how we submitted or started our careers submitting papers, by mail, by proper mail. So there was a postman, there was a post office to which you deposited the paper, and the paper actually reached an editorial office, and they opened an envelope and found the paper. So there were a number of things that needed to be done, but one of the things that was there was a covering letter. Even today, with electronic submissions, most journals would have a place where you could write a comment for the editors. And this could be something akin to a covering letter. So what should you do in the covering letter? Should you write something great about yourself, how great you are, how many awards you won? No, that's not what is important at the moment. What is important is that you need to get past these people who've been called gatekeepers of science. I think I said that on the first day, that editors of journals have been called gatekeepers of science, because essentially they decide what goes on into the public domain. So just another aside and a story. So I'm going to be telling you lots and lots of stories today. I'm in that mood, I think. So to tell you a story that some of the most path-breaking discoveries, for example, smallpox immunization, Jenna, didn't get published the first time around. So what he did was he went ahead and published small little, self-published, small little, pamphlets which had details of his studies and circulated it to friends. It was all hard copy at that time. But the important thing was, so, if you're too far ahead of your time, sometimes it becomes difficult to get past these gatekeepers. So your covering letter should highlight the importance of your paper, be brief about it. In a sentence or two, in a nutshell, say why your paper is great, why they should publish your paper, but be modest. Don't say this is the best thing that has ever been done on the north of the Sahara or the south of the Vindhyas or something like that. Okay, so don't brag, be modest, and try and get your message across. So the best way of trying to figure out what to write about the importance of your paper is, in a nutshell, to try and explain to a friend who doesn't know what you were doing, what you've done. And now your friend is not going to wait for you for 15 minutes to try and explain everything. The friend is going to be impatient and want to listen about what is important about the paper in a minute or two. And that description is what you need to say about the importance of your paper. Finally, I said this first up, that you must look at the instructions of the journal. I know an editor of an Indian journal who gets very upset when he gets a paper where the authors have never followed his instructions. They haven't even read the instructions. They're not even familiar with what the journal needs or wants. And your likelihood of getting past that particular editor, if you haven't followed instructions of the journal and your science is so-so, the likelihood is small. So therefore, do these things, adhere to the format that they want, follow the instructions, and do say in a few sentences, 2 or 3, max 3, not too many sentences, why your paper is important. For you, this paper is the most important thing that you've done, and maybe this is the most important thing in that particular month or year or quarter or whatever for you. But for the journal, it's receiving a large number of papers every day. Hello? Hello?
So you were audible, sir. Sorry.
Okay, so I got a message saying that my network connection had been lost. So if I was audible all along,
Piyush, we can hear you. Yes,
okay,
yes.
good.
We are able to hear you.
Okay, all right, good. All right, so along with the covering letter, there's usually a checklist of things that the journal wants you to do. Some journals will require you to submit your paper with signatures of all authors, saying they have read and approved the contents. A number of others today, like submission, would not require you to upload anything like this. All that they would do is they would ask you to write in the names and email IDs of all the authors. Now remember, people are often, when you're submitting, it's in the middle of the night. You're tired out. The boss has been shouting at you and screaming at you, why haven't you submitted this paper? It's 15 days since it's been ready. And you finally decide tomorrow morning, I'm not going to listen to any more of this. I'm going to submit the paper. And so you want to submit the paper, and the journal now starts saying on the submission site, starts asking you to fill up stupid things. Email IDs of all the authors. And you suddenly realize you don't have the email IDs of 2 of your collaborators who are from another department. So you put in any email ID. The system will accept that. But when the system sends out emails to these people and those bounce back, then your paper gets stuck till you provide those email IDs. Because a lot of these journals would actually send an email to these people, to your co-authors, and say, please approve your authorship. And unless you approve your authorship, you will not, your paper will not move forward into the peer review process. Some of the other things that a journal may require from you is information on prior publication of the paper, a part of it, a complete version of it, an abstract based on this paper. So if anything like this has been done, if any prior publication has happened, you must tell them upfront that this is what has happened. Otherwise, you could end up with a duplicate publication. The second thing that they often ask you is, have you presented this at a conference? And if you've presented it, then do say so. Sometimes we presented the paper at multiple conferences. So say that you've presented it at multiple conferences. Don't hesitate. Don't tell a lie, because you could unnecessarily get caught out. It's much better to be truthful. Have a rejection because their requirement is that you have not presented the paper anywhere else. Hardly any journal has that requirement. But just in case there is a journal like that, no worries. There are lots of other journals you could go to. But don't tell a lie, because the lie could get you into difficulties at a later date. Once something is published, it's there in the public domain, and therefore is available for lots and lots of people to read. And all this is taking you also towards the second part of the talk today, and that's the fraud and misconduct kind of talk, because all this could be construed as misconduct, and you could get into difficulties if others were to complain or to come to know that you were indulged in anything that's not acceptable. Most journals would want you to fill up a financial or conflicts of interest, just the financial conflicts or other conflicts of interest statement. Some journals use a standardized format. The ICMJ, of whom you've heard a number of times now in the past 3-4 days, 3 days, the fourth day today, so for 4 days, the ICMJ has a standardized format for people to prepare their conflicts of interest statement. So you could actually download that PDF from the ICMJ website, use that, and store your conflict of interest statements. It may be nil, but then you could upload it and send it to anybody and everybody whenever they want it, because you got it ready and available with you. Most journals want you, all journals will want some contact details. Sometimes they'll want contact details of the corresponding author. Sometimes they'll want the contact details of the corresponding author and a guarantor. Sometimes they'll want corresponding contact details of everybody, at least the email IDs, even if they want the telephone numbers and the fax numbers. Most journals would have different kinds of articles that they would publish. Editorials, original articles, brief communication, also called a short report at times, research letters, etc., etc. So depending upon what kind of article your manuscript represents, you need to choose that when you submit the article. If you choose an incorrect format, again, it would lead to some delay, because it could end up going back and forth because the format was not right, or it could end up getting back and forth between the editor and the sub-editor who is assigned to handle that particular manuscript. Then there could be other details that every journal might have, specific things that they want, and if there are any such things, then you can go ahead and fill up those. Some journals will want you to transfer copyright at the time of submission. Most journals want you to transfer copyright at the time of acceptance. But there are journals which ask you to transfer copyright at the time of submission. If they ask you to do so, please do so. Because if you don't, they won't process the article further. There could be other forms that they would want you to submit. And remember, if you cannot figure out what to do on a website, it is much better to ask a question than to do the wrong thing. So, for example, if you were to do an electronic submission and you were to upload your tables and figures at a place where they were not supposed to be uploaded, when your article goes out for peer review, the peer review can't see your tables and figures and might end up reviewing your paper on the basis of the text alone, which is not what you want. You want the reviewer to review your paper based on all the information that you provided. So if you have any doubt about what to do, where to do, how to do, please ask a question, send an email, and most often you would have a technical support team responding, or even the editorial staff responding fairly quickly and letting you know that this is what you need to do. Finally, they may ask you for permissions if for material that you are reproducing, which is previously published, or for if you're submitting clinical photographs, they might ask you for permission from the patient to reproduce those or print those photographs. Keep e-copies of everything you submit. It's not unusual that you submit something which is the final version, supposedly, but 3 weeks later, when you get a query back, you start looking at a semi-final version. So if you have a folder in which you put everything and you've numbered that and said final submission, then you know this is what you need to work with. Because we've occasionally had people working on a previous version, sending us a revised version, which was different from the paper that they had actually submitted. So be very careful and keep e-copies of everything you submit, preferably at a place in your desktop labeled clearly that this is the final version with a date on it. When the editorial office receives the article, today they would receive it almost instantaneously because it's on the journal submission sites. And they would then assess the article within the next 24-48 hours. Most of them would look at the article and see whether it is suitable for the particular journal. If it is not, then they would probably return it to you immediately. And these are often called either editorial rejections or desk rejections or in-house rejections. So if you get a rejection very quickly, it just means that the article was not appropriate for that particular journal, or they already published something very similar and they didn't want to publish something all over again, or you were way out as far as your impression of sending that journal, that particular article was concerned. If they find the article is suitable for that particular journal, they would look for compliance with instructions. Are the signed statements there? Are the declarations there? Are the forms there? Are all the checklists there? Excuse me. And is the electronic manuscript formatted in the way they wish it to be formatted? They would then allocate a number, and you would receive an acknowledgement with the manuscript number. They may, in addition, ask for more information, something that you may not have uploaded, something that you may have ignored, something that you submitted but was not clear to them. And if they do so, if they do ask for this information, then please go ahead and reply to this. Remember that a number of times these emails go into our junk mailboxes. And the reason is that these editorial office email IDs are not necessarily in our contact details. And if they are not in our contact book, they may go into the junk mail. So always, if you submitted an article, always look at your junk mail box frequently to see that you don't miss any of this. Any questions on what I've said up till now? It's fairly simple, but you could still have questions. So if you have, No? Okay. So the next step after the journal has done all this is to decide whether it's going to send this paper out for peer review or not. If the paper is suitable, if they think that this could end up being published in a revised form, or they think the material is interesting enough for them to send it to somebody to have a look at. And if that expert, especially, this would be especially true for general medical journals, such as a journal that I edit, where I am not familiar with each and every nuance of each and every field. Because I run a general medical journal, I therefore read a fair amount of material from other specialties. I skim through a lot of table of contents of different journals, so I am familiar with a lot of things, but I am not an expert on a lot of things. So I may be a jack of all trades, but I'm certainly not a master of a lot of them. And therefore, I might choose to send the paper to someone to review, even if I thought that it was plus minus. It may not pass muster, but much better for me to take a chance and send it off to somebody to have a look, who's an expert. Now, there are various ways in which I can get the peer review done. So when peer review started, do you have any idea how peer review started? Anybody? History of peer review? We could do another talk sometime. It's very interesting. No? No? So initially there was no or hardly any peer review. And then when editors of journals such as the Philosophical Transactions started getting papers, and there was science there which they did not understand, they would pass on these papers not in any confidential manner, but to somebody else who could actually look at the paper and say whether it was good enough to be published or not, or whether there was some strength in that science. The final decision would still be theirs. Slowly, over a period of time, this became formalized and more papers started going out for peer review. Interestingly, till the late 1990s, early 2000s, I'm not sure of the exact year, but for a very, very long time, the Lancet never sent out papers outside of its offices for peer review. So the Lancet had a system of peer review which was in-house. Interestingly, they had over 40 full-time doctors from different specialities working, 40 doctors from different specialities working full-time on the Lancet. And therefore, they had an expert in probably all the fields. And they said, okay, we don't need to send out papers for peer review outside of the journal. But then slowly, they too have changed, and they do now send out a fair number of papers for peer review outside of the Lancet offices. But they do a fairly rigorous peer review within the offices of the Lancet. So different ways in which peer review can be done. The most commonly used method is a single blinded method, where the author, you, are not aware of who the paper is going out to, and you receive anonymized comments. The next method is a double blinded method, where neither you nor the reviewer know who, so the reviewer doesn't know who the author is, and you as the author don't know who the reviewer is. Some people feel that this is more appropriate, especially for our settings where we have a very strong hierarchical structure, and the big boss's papers will never get rejected, and that's why you want to end up putting the big boss's name on the paper, even though they don't know anything about the paper. And Rajiv yesterday told you then create false experts. You're the actual expert, but the boss becomes the expert, and the boss is given invitations to come and talk, and then you start preparing the boss's slides on a subject that the boss knows nothing about. So that's not something that's very good. So single blinded or double blinded. The other exact opposite of this is the open peer review system. And some fields in science have always had an open peer review system, but the health sciences picked up open peer review much later. So the BMJ was amongst the first journals which picked up open peer review. And what is open peer review? The author knows who's the reviewer, and the reviewer knows who's the author. So everybody knows everybody, and you're not hiding behind a curtain and criticizing somebody's paper. What you're saying is upfront, the author knows who said it, and you know who's done the work. And finally, the third system is an online system of peer review. The Medical Journal of Australia, again, there are a number of fields in science which have this online peer review system, and have historically had it for a long period of time. It's not something that's new. It's been there for a fair amount of time. And Medical Journal of Australia, some years ago, first ran a randomized trial trying to understand whether the online system was better or a single blinded peer review system was better. And they finally came to the conclusion that the single blinded peer review system was better as far as inputs for them was concerned. And the online peer review system didn't necessarily give them the inputs that they were looking for. So in the online system of peer review, you just put each and every article that you think passes muster in-house onto a website where anybody and everybody who is interested
Hello, Piyush, we are not able to hear
in work
you.
of that field goes, reads the paper, writes a comment. You do this, it opens, so there's look at, create a revised version of the paper and then submit that again. Okay. Sorry, you can hear me?
So can you repeat that online one because yours
Okay,
got
I'll
disconnected?
go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so the online system is that I put every article that comes to me onto a website, and anybody and everybody, not experts, anybody, you, a resident who's interested or working in that field, could go and comment upon the article and say what is good and bad about it. And all these comments would be stored and be available to the editors to review. And on the basis of this, they could then take a decision on what to do. The randomized trial that the Medical Journal of Australia ran between online and single-blinded peer review, they found single-blinded peer review to be better than the online system of peer review, and they've given up the online system of peer review for quite some time now. But there are other fields, small fields where everybody knows everybody, where they still do this. Thermonuclear physics, for example, apparently have a website where people just go and deposit their papers. They wait for colleagues to comment upon it for a period of 10 to 12 days. And the end of that, they prepare version 2. The previous one was version 1, now it's a version 2. Then they again wait for some more time and get more comments, and then they prepare a version 3. And so on and so forth, till at one point in time, they say, okay, now enough is enough. And this is now the final version that's published. And that's available for everybody to read, including all the previous versions. So if you wish to see how they changed, that too you could see. In the health sciences, nobody has the time to do this, and therefore, I think even if we were to try the system, it probably would not succeed very well. So how do we select reviewers? We select reviewers by various methods. Now, one of the things that we do is ask our authors to suggest reviewers, and that's the third in the list: database, known individuals, and author suggestions. Now, what authors need to remember is that if you look at the instructions, almost all journals will very clearly say, please don't give us names of your friends, family members, mentors, guides, colleagues in your department. Give us names of people who are experts in the field. And what we do is we end up giving the names of people who don't even know anything about the field. So the paper is a pharmacology paper, and we say so-and-so Department of Forensic Medicine. That makes sense. So that's useless. Most often editors would not use your suggestions, but sometimes the people whom you suggest could be people who already exist on the database, which is the first thing that people look at, database of that particular journal as far as reviewers are concerned. And they would then send the paper to these people because you're also suggesting, and they expect the database. They also have the name of these people in the database. Known individuals. There was a study done by the former editors of a journal called the Journal of General Internal Medicine, and they looked at who were good peer reviewers, and they found people who were middle-aged, middle rung in their academic ladder and known to the editors with a background in epidemiology and biostatistics were more likely to give good reviews compared to people who didn't have this. So sending a paper to a 65-year-old or a close to 65-year-old may not be a great idea. Similarly, sending the paper to a 25 or a 30-year-old may also not be a great idea. But it's a great idea to send the paper to somebody in the middle, somebody who's familiar with the subject, somebody who's already getting to be known as an expert by people. How many people do most journals send the papers to? 1 to 3. Most journals would send it to 2, but I know of journals in India which send papers to as many as now 11. I used to think of 7 as the upper limit, and I used to say that in all my talks, but now I've recently heard that there's a journal which sends out its papers for review to 11 people. In addition to these peer reviewers, they may go to an expert in statistics because there's something very specific there which they feel the experts may not be able to understand, or they could go to a methodologist, a person who's an expert in the methodology of doing a study, and ask that person to review the article. You can make this out very easily when the comments come back to you, because the methodologist would be talking about primarily the methods and nothing else in his or her comments. What is the editor's expectations as far as reviewers' roles are concerned? What we expect, so I'm saying this to all of you because I expect all of you will become reviewers at some point in time. And therefore, what do we expect from you? We expect fair, honest, detailed comments. I tell my reviewers who take months and months to reply that if you submitted a paper and you did not get a reply for months and months, how would you feel? Unfortunately, despite saying this, a lot of our reviewers in India will sit over a paper for months and months. Every time you remind them, they will say, tomorrow, definitely. I was very busy. I will do it tomorrow, positively. And the tomorrow never comes. So at some point in time, editors need to take a call and take away the paper from that particular reviewer. Keep an assessment of which reviewer does fair and good and prompt reviews, and keep them on their database and remove the others. So what we're looking for is fair, honest, detailed comments. What we're looking is for somebody to point out the strengths and the weaknesses. Something that will help the authors improve the paper, constructive criticism. We don't want useless criticism for the sake of criticism. And we want it to be done in a reasonable period of time, sometimes in a week, sometimes in 2 weeks, but certainly not beyond 3 to 4 weeks. Remember, the reviewer's recommendations are almost never the final word. Almost always, editors of journals would look at those comments and take a decision on whether or not to publish the paper. At a workshop for editors in Delhi, where we had a large number of editors from abroad, some of the top-notch general medical journals, editors were there, and somebody asked them, how often, one of the Indian editors asked them, how often do you accept a paper that has been rejected by 2 or 3 reviewers? They said, all the time. Interesting. So they said, how often do you reject a paper that has been accepted by 2 or 3 reviewers? They said, all the time. So then another person got up and said, well, then what is the purpose of the peer review process? The peer review process is to try and improve upon the paper. Every good editor believes that whatever is submitted to them is publishable. Whatever goes past the in-house peer review, and the rejections in the in-house peer review are usually because of doesn't fit into our format. We don't publish animal studies. We don't publish gel papers. We don't publish, and things like this. And therefore, they would do an in-house rejection. Specialty journals might look at the paper a little more critically and then reject the paper in-house. But most general medical journals, these would be the reasons for rejection. So the reviewer's recommendations would come with a set of comments, and these comments would be sent to you to try and improve the paper. So the final decision is based on multiple factors: space within the journal. So again, another interesting story. There's an editors forum, a listserv as we call it, on which one day there was an email from an author who said that an editor of a journal first accepted my paper and then a few months later rejected the paper. And this is an editor's forum. So there was hue and cry. There was editor after editor saying this was stupid, the editor was no good, he should be chucked out of his job, etc., etc. And how can you do this unless there is some misconduct that you found? And he said, no misconduct at all. And then finally, the then editor of the BMJ, who was also a member of that forum, of that listserv, replied back and said, I am the culprit. And he said what they had done, they mistook the number of papers that they could publish and accepted more than the number of papers they could publish within a reasonable period of time. And therefore, he took a decision that some of the papers which were sort of borderline, they would reject. And that's the reason why they went ahead and sent out these rejection letters. He said after all this noise and hullabaloo on that listserv, he decided to go ahead and create supplement issues of the journal and try and publish all these papers in these supplement issues, in these special issues, so that he did not end up rejecting these papers. So space, topicality, repetitive, interest to a reader. So if you were to open journals in the past year, you would see a lot of repetition as far as papers related to COVID-19 is concerned. And the same thing over and over again. And so repetition was thought to be useful, and therefore people repeated. On the other hand, there could be something that's a well-established fact, and then people would stop publishing that again and again. So most often they would communicate to you what their final decision is. So this is just an idea of the rejection rates of different journals. Our rejection rate is closer to 85% now. It was 75% at some point in time. And all these journals have added a few percentage points to their rejection rates. But don't get disheartened with these rejection rates. If you work hard enough, then you'll be able to publish your paper. So when you get your reviewers' comments from the editorial office, there are three possible scenarios. And your response needs to be based on the understanding of what these scenarios are. So the first could be accept, the second could be revise, and the third could be reject. So if your paper's been accepted, first go without anything. You wrote a brilliant paper, they thought this was Nobel Prize winning stuff, and therefore they went ahead and decided to publish it straight off. They could still end up with clarifications on minor points. They might want you to improve the photographs that you submitted. They might want to convert the way that you presented some of the information into a different format, a table into a figure into a table, change some material in the text, add a few extra lines in the discussion. Some journals want you to provide key messages because they put these in different parts of the journal in boxed as boxed items. Other journals would use a key message in the contents and put in a two-liner there as to what is there in that particular paper. They might ask you to clarify some things, and they would certainly ask you to read proofs before they went ahead and published. Whenever they ask you to do this, please do it within the specified time rather than take your own time over it. Now my paper is accepted, now I can do whatever I feel like. No, you shouldn't do that. The second thing is revise. You could be asked, and most papers would go into this category, reject and revise. The straight off acceptances are very, very few. So the revise could be major issues. There could be clarifications on methodology, clarification on your results. There could be clarification on the statistics that you used. There may be a desire or a request to add or remove material from the discussion. There may be an instruction to remove or provide additional information, or again change the format of the material. If your paper has been rejected, don't be dejected. Don't sit down and moan and brood over it. You're allowed to be upset for a day, maybe two, but that's it. Submit elsewhere. You can appeal if you feel that you have a strong case. If you feel that the reviewer was biased, if you feel the reviewers have not understood your paper, but if you appeal, then you must have a very strong case. How do you appeal? You appeal politely. So don't appeal on the day you get the rejection because you're already upset. So wait for 3 or 4 days, read the comments again, try and understand them. Is there any sense that is being made? No, there is none. Wait for another 2-3 days and then read those comments all over again. And if you still think that you have a strong case, then go ahead and appeal. Get the senior most author to write, not necessarily the corresponding author, but the senior most author to write. Stick to the facts only. Don't stick to anything else, just the facts. No emotion here. Take time to phrase your response correctly and don't get into an argument. A boxing match, you're not going to succeed. A boxing match, the editor is the person who's going to take the final decision. He's the judge. So he's the referee. The moment you start having a boxing match with the referee says, you lose. Match over. So don't do that. And make only one effort. So you write, you make an appeal. At the end of the appeal gets rejected. That's it. Move elsewhere. Don't go on wasting your time with that particular journal. When you submit elsewhere, look at the comments that have been provided to you. If a formal peer review has happened, then these can help improve the article. A lot of us would just throw these into the dustbin because we are so angry and upset with the editor of that journal who's rejected our paper. And when you want to use these to improve your paper, follow the same initial steps as you would for revising your paper. So the initial steps are to read and understand the comments that have come carefully. There have been occasions when we've made up the final answer and then somebody has realized that we made an error in understanding the question that was posed by the reviewer. So read these, understand them carefully, get somebody else to read them and have a discussion and see that everybody understands them and thinks that it's the same thing that they're asking for. Number the points. Some of these will come in paragraphs, some of these will come in point form, some of these will come in bullet form. Every journal has their own way of doing it, but number them so that you don't miss out on any point. Divide these into those you agree with and those you disagree with. The agree ones are easy to do because you agree and therefore you can provide a response which is straightforward and simple. I agree with this and I made this change. But if you disagree, then there is additional work that you would require to do. There could also be comments which could require additional work to do. You might agree with them, but it requires additional work, some additional analysis, some additional extraction of data from your case sheets or whatever, or they may be straightforward and simple. So depending upon what this is, you can decide, is there a time limit? Have they given you 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Can you do it in this period of time? If you say you can, then sure, go ahead. If you can't, you're traveling for the next 3 weeks and there's a marriage in the family or there's a huge function and you obviously won't get time to do it, or there's an exam coming up and you can't do it, then ask for time, additional time upfront, rather than wait till the end of that time limit and then ask for an extension. Most journals will give you an extension. There's hardly any journal which will not give you an extension. So if there are points in which you require additional work and you disagree, or there are points that you disagree with, then you need to collect more information that you would use to reply to these, do the additional analysis, collect the supporting evidence, and then go ahead and present this information in whatever format you wish to. When you prepare your response, be simple and to the point, be polite, provide enough supporting evidence, and get approval from your co-authors. Revise the paper and then submit. When you revise your paper, make the alterations, detail them in your response. See on which para, on which page, on which line, what has been added. Because otherwise the editorial office has to search through where are the changes that you have done. If there are any additional references that you've added, ensure that your numbering has not gone haywire and renumber your references accordingly. If you've been asked to remove or add tables and figures, then look at the numbering of the tables and figures and ensure that you've got the right legends and the right number of tables and figures included. Recheck everything and only then submit your paper. Have a covering letter. Most journals want a point-wise reply to the reviewer's comments. Have the original manuscript and the revised manuscript submitted. Sometimes journals would say, send me a manuscript with track changes only. and you can do that. Then you don't need to send a separate original and revised manuscript, and send it well within the deadline. So that's the end of my talk.